Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar on what is depression and what is MQ doing about it. My name is Milligan. I'm the CEO of MQ Mental Health Research, and I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to depression and tell you a little bit about the cutting edge research that MQ is involved in. I'm joined today by MQ Trustee and Director of Herbert Smith Freehills, Chris Parsons. Chris, do you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Lee, and thanks for involving me. So I'm a lawyer at an international law firm called Herbert Smith Freehills. I've been at that firm for 36 years now. And the reason I'm here with you, as you will know, and as others will hear in a moment, is that I've struggled with mental ill health over the years, albeit I'm in a good place at the moment. So I'm able to talk about depression from a personal perspective.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. And Chris is adept at sharing his experience, and so will tell us a little bit firsthand about what depression feels like. So without further ado, we'll get started. I'll put a few caveats into the whole presentation. I am not a trained psychologist or clinician. At MQ, I oversee the research that we deliver into these areas. So if there's anything that is triggering or that you think you want follow-up with, we will be pointing you in certain directions for additional advice, but do feel free to drop away from this if you feel there's something that is too much for you to handle personally. So who are MQ? Let me tell you a little bit about us as an organization. We exist to try and improve our understanding of how and why mental illnesses first occur, which can really help us to speed up diagnosis. We also are looking to improve treatments for mental illness because we believe that everyone should have rapid access to mental health treatment that works for them specifically. And both that access and treatment that works bit are two really important bits in their own right. And we also work towards preventing illness before it begins. So we believe that there is a world, a reality where if we understand mental ill health enough, we can actually put things in place that will slow down the encroachment of mental health in our lives. So MQ was founded in 2013, and since then we've invested over £22 million into research worldwide, about 50% of that based in the UK and 50% in the rest of the globe, all across the mental health spectrum. And as a charity, we raise funds every year to invest into new research. When it comes to depression, it's estimated that about 300 million people struggle with major depressive disorders. In fact, according to WHO, depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, and it will be the largest burden of all disease by 2030, despite global pandemics of COVID. And the research we invest in is world-class. We seek out the greatest minds at the greatest institutions and back really cutting-edge science, and we'll share some of the impact we've had in a moment. We take a really holistic view of the person, really understanding that mental health is actually about this interplay between mind, body, brain, and then the societal and environmental factors that are there. And so we bring together psychologists, neurologists, clinicians from all across the spectrum to really try and tackle this. It's not just academic study of books. It's recognizing that we are whole people with huge interaction. And if we can unpick some of those interactions, we think we can understand an awful lot more. So today we're going to be talking specifically about depression. At the end, I will share a slide that's got some of the other seminars we've got this week and next on other topics. And this has been an area that MQ has been researching into for a number of years since our start, and will be a thematic focus for us moving forward because of the scale of the burden. So we know that everyone feels sad sometimes. It's a natural part of life, especially after a loss or a bereavement. But clinical depression goes beyond that sort of normal, if you like. Clinical depression, or a major depressive disorder, is a diagnosable condition that leaves people feeling sad, hopeless, or empty for an extended period of time, and sometimes even years. One of the key features of clinical depression, which differentiate it from simply normal sadness, if you like, is a lack of feeling pleasure and happiness. So that absence of happiness is a major sign. So the signs of depression can vary, and they're not always obvious, and it looks markedly different from person to person. Some people can appear outwardly to be quite happy, as they might be trying to mask or hide or just conceal what's going on internally, or even understand it themselves. And the symptoms that a person with depression experiences usually include feelings of unhappiness and low self-esteem, sometimes feeling constantly anxious or worried. There are also physical symptoms like fatigue, sleeping badly, or a big change in appetite or sex drive. But two people with depression can have very different experiences of that. And while one might sleep excessively, another might develop insomnia. And so trying to diagnose depression with this sort of range and spectrum can be a real challenge in itself. Other people might experience weight loss or weight gain. And if you know someone who's starting to withdraw from social contact, cancel plans regularly, somebody who is changed in their mood, is quick to get angry, or is lost interest in things that they normally have, these can be signs of depression. But it can be really hard to recognize that. And so improving the conversation about mental health in the workplace, between friends, all of that is really important to make sure that we try to unpick and understand what's going on with people so that we can help find the support they need. There are many reasons why someone might have depression. There's no one single or simple answer in reality. Usually it's a combination of different reasons. Some people are genetically predisposed, that has totally thrown me. Some people genetically will just be more susceptible to depression. That is a better way to say that. So if there's a family history of depression, then a person can be more likely to have it themselves. However, there's no single gene that we're aware of that is responsible for depression. It's more probably a combination of genes and also the fact that by experiencing depression through someone else, you are learning traits that might then lead into that position, or learning behaviors. So family history can be part of that. A traumatic experience like a violent incident or abuse or racism or bullying can also be a trigger or can add layers to the things that trigger depression. And we know that socioeconomic inequalities is a huge part of this and adds another layer of risk, if you like, to people suffering from depression. There's also, as we've seen with long COVID, severe illness or physical ill health can then lead to protracted bouts of potential depression. And we know there's links between physical and mental health in both directions in that case. So a real sort of combination of factors pulling and coming together that can trigger depression in any individual. The main treatments for depression are therapies like cognitive behavioral therapies or drugs like antidepressants. Both are effective for around 50% of people. And it seems to be the same people who are helped by both. There's a real overlap, in fact. So it's not 50% of 50%, it's 50% of all overlapping into those two sort of categories. So there's a significant number of people who are suffering depression who are not being helped by the best available treatments, if in fact those treatments are available to them. And that's a whole separate challenge. So here in the UK, 10% of the population are living with depression right now. And as I said, worldwide, that's 300 million. Just under 20% of adults in the UK have had a diagnosis of depression at some point in their life. Mental health problems, including depression, are the single biggest cause of disability in the UK, and it's believed to cost the economy an estimated £105 billion a year. That's roughly the cost of the entire NHS in terms of lost income because of people struggling with depression. And despite this, just £1.55 per person affected by depression is spent on better treatments and interventions. And to put that figure into perspective, so £1.55 per person, for those that suffer with cancer, there's £228 spent per person on research on how to change that. So there's a huge need to increase investment into mental health research and specifically into depression. That's the sort of facts and figures behind depression. Chris, why don't I hand to you, and why don't you give us sort of your real world experience of that? I'll stop sharing our screens so we can see your face a little more clearly.
Thanks, Lee. So look, just to give you a sort of a short version of my story, one of the things that I've learned during my time as a trustee of MQ is that 75% of us who go on to struggle with mental health issues, the seeds of those difficulties are often sown in childhood. And that's certainly true in my case. I had a very difficult relationship with my dad, very dysfunctional. He really struggled with me as the eldest boy. The fact that he perceived that I sort of became between him and my mum, all of her emotional energies, to the extent they were focused on me, were excluding him as he saw it, and therefore he was desperate really for me to leave the family home as soon as possible. And as a result of that, my worldview, as it transpired, meant that I developed very high levels of anxiety, because my world, as I saw it, was uncertain, dangerous, difficult, uncertain, unreliable, all of those things. And that was a worldview that I took with me to school, to university, and to work. And it meant that I really struggled with the work environment through stress, anxiety. And a big part of my story was alcohol, because I used alcohol to medicate the anxiety that I felt. And so for a time at least, alcohol seemed to be the answer. The danger with that, of course, is that if you drink alcohol in sufficient quantities and you have the propensity, you can indeed become reliant on it, as I did. And so I am an alcoholic, albeit in remission. And just to give you a sense of, my very first episode of significant depression was that actually it was my body in the end that voted for me. I'd love to be able to tell you that I put my hand up and said, look, I'm really struggling. I need some help. I didn't do that because I was ashamed of the way I was feeling. There was an enormous amount of stigma. We're now looking at back in the 1990s. I'm mid-1990s. I'm pleased to say that things have moved on in certain industries, in certain professions, and in certain cultures, not in all. And I'm very familiar with my work around the world, that not everyone talks openly about mental ill health. But back in the mid-1990s, I certainly wasn't going to talk about it. I perceived that, if there was a challenge with my brain, that would dramatically impact the way I was perceived at work, and dramatically impact my ability to move forward and be promoted within the law firm that I was in. So I worked incredibly hard. I probably got to the stage of working 7 days a week. I medicated each evening, so I wasn't working, I was drinking, and when I wasn't drinking, I was trying to sleep, although sleep wasn't always easy, as you'll have heard from Lee. Sleep is often dramatically impacted by stress and anxiety. And in the end, actually, as I said, my body voted for me. I collapsed. I was rushed to hospital. I had every conceivable test done. And at the end of the tests, a rather too jolly consultant, in my view, came to tell me, Mr. Parsons, I've got excellent news for you. There's nothing wrong with you. And of course, this was the worst news, because I wanted something rare and exotic that would explain how I felt, and that I could share with my family, with my friends, with work, and everything suddenly would make sense. But of course, because there was nothing physically wrong with me, it only left a mental ill health issue, and my stress and anxiety very quickly turned to depression. I didn't realize it was possible for somebody to spend 3 months in bed crying. But sadly, I can assure you that it is possible because I was that person. So that's really, sort of my first exposure to depression. I did struggle with subsequent episodes of depression, but it was only once I really made some really important and radical changes in my life and had medical interventions. And for me, I was one of the lucky 50% because medication and counseling unquestionably have saved my life, and frankly continue to do so. So that's a little bit of my story, which I hope sort of gives some context to what Lee is saying in terms of the significance of depression, how common it is, and frankly, and people often forget this, how life-threatening it is. In each of the times that I struggled with depression, I wanted to go to sleep and not wake up again. And that is, I know, the way many people feel about it. Thanks, Lee.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing so honestly with everybody. Exactly as you described, your experience specifically, has echoes of some of the stuff we described at the start there, but also could look very different for someone else. Without trying to be too trite, if there was a single piece of advice you'd give to anybody who's feeling the way you've kind of described, what would that, what's that one thing you would just push them for first?
Yeah, well, look, I particularly now that people are talking about it more often, I desperately wish that I had asked for help earlier, and that's certainly what I always encourage people to do now who are not in a good place.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. What I want to take us through now is some of the research that's ongoing about depression and some of the things that we know much better than perhaps, Chris, when you were first experiencing depression. So I'll take us through a few of those things, and if we've got comments or questions on the way through, we can sort of chip into those as well. The research that MQ is investing in is to help find better ways of treating and preventing depression. And in the last 8 years, we've invested in a number of different avenues of research. So the first example is that we invested in a study at the University of Pennsylvania in the US, which aimed to create an analytical model that would predict the likely outcome of a treatment for depression within a patient. Because the complexity of depression, there are so many different treatments, as I say, and knowing whether or not they're going to have an impact on an individual is really hard. So Dr. Robert DeRubis developed what is now known as the Personalized Advantage Index, which uses cutting-edge statistical modeling to basically list appropriate treatment options for patients with depression. And having a tool like this means that we're able to predict, based on the types of symptoms being experienced, which types of treatments are most likely to have a better impact. So rather than a trial and error sort of approach, we're able to understand much more effectively how to treat. Now, equally, as we say, there's still a big need for more treatments. So this is a great tool to reduce the amount of time in finding the right treatment. So that's tackling one of the key areas in depression. If you came to our webinar on Thursday last week, you'll have heard Bryony, my colleague, talking about this piece of research that we've invested in as well. This is Dr. Ghulam Kandekar from Cambridge University, and he's been investigating the role of inflammation in depression. So heart disease and depression are the biggest and second biggest causes of disability in the world together. However, it wasn't until Dr. Ghulam started to investigate the inflammation mechanisms were identified as the link between the two. So his research identified what are the types of fats, triglycerides, that present in your blood that are likely to be an underlying risk factor in depression. So we all know about the link with heart disease, but he was able to show that there's actually a link in those fats in depression as well. And so his research has also highlighted a link between smoking and inflammation, and therefore inflammation and depression, so smoking and depression being linked together. So again, more research on how the brain and the body are intrinsically linked, and there's more research going on now to find out how we can tackle that inflammation and see whether or not treating one of those physical conditions can also then immediately reduce the burden of depression. We've also done research into attitudes and depression. So 500,000 people in the UK have rheumatoid arthritis, which causes joint inflammation. So again, we can see an immediate link. But around a third of people who suffer with arthritis also have symptoms of depression. And so 40% of patients experience persistent pain, which can be really difficult for people and lead to depression and anxiety. So we invested in research with Dr. Sam Norton from King's College, and it's been jointly funded with Arthritis Research UK to develop a new app that can help healthcare professionals track both the physical and mental health symptoms in people with arthritis to try and identify the cause and effect. So patients with persistent pain can have better support because we can understand what are the causes and effects. And again, this link between inflammation and depression is a really key research area, and knowing that the triggers of one and the other could be a real breakthrough for us. So this app will soon be available for all NHS rheumatology departments to integrate mental health into the care pathway, so that you're receiving from NHS care more of a one-stop shop, so they can build in mental health support on the way through. So a real sort of breakthrough in a change in practice. And then one other research project to share with you briefly, which is really exciting. The research I've been discussing there obviously focuses a lot on the global north, but the burden of depression, the burden of mental health actually is well over exaggerated within the global south. And so looking at how we tackle mental health inequality has been a huge part of MQ's research. So as we know, there's a large number of people living with HIV in the global south, and in Uganda specifically, there's only one qualified mental health professional per 100,000 people. And so we invested in a research project by Dr. Ethel Mpungu, who was actually last year nominated as one of the BBC's 100 most influential women in the world. And she has an incredible project that is specifically taking community interventions to look at how she can support people who have HIV and are also then suffering from depression, and use that community focus to be able to improve their mental health. And what's incredible about the stages of this project are, by focusing on supporting someone's mental health in that community, that individual is able to improve their financial position by getting back into work, improve their societal position, improve their family position. And so the impact on their mental health has an impact on their employment, has an impact on the sustainability of their livelihood, and then moves that forward. And it's really, again, tackling one of the most underserved groups in Uganda. And we've got big hopes of being able to see this expand into several other African nations, and trials are going on to replicate that piece of work. And we've only got about 5 minutes left. There are some other studies that we've invested in that you can find out more about on our website, about preventing depression and looking at how we can predict depression in children and young people, and also research into speaking up about depression and how we use data to better understand inequalities. So how can we pull together government data, school data, clinical data to be able to fully get a picture of depression and its impact. So loads more on the MQ website that you can read about. Coming back to you, Chris, if we were looking at what the challenge of depression really looks like on a day-to-day basis, if you could sort of think of the 2 or 3 biggest areas of research you would love to see investment into, what might those areas be? Where do you think some of those exciting opportunities are to see us progress and move forward with depression?
Yeah, well, look, you know, one of the main reasons that that I was keen to join MQ 5 years ago now, Lee, was the position that the brain is so not understood effectively, and how through research we can help people who struggle with extraordinarily difficult mental ill health issues. I mean, you've already, flagged, a couple of things which I think are absolutely fascinating. One is, that the 50% are not impacted by medication. As I said, thank goodness I was. But what do we do with that other group that isn't, and how can we help them? Because it's the most awful business starting on medication. It's your lifeline, and if after several months of trying it and trying different types of medication, they don't ultimately work, that itself can actually make you even iller. And I'm also really interested in this link between stresses in the body, anxieties in the body, and inflammation. And of course, we all know that people who struggle with significant anxiety, you're then living with the sort of flight or fight symptom the whole time. And of course, it's fine to have it for a very limited time, because it means that we are able to deal with an immediate danger. But what you can't do is to struggle with that for long periods. And that has a very dramatic impact on the body. I mean, very interestingly, as you'll know, Lee, I did a couple of slightly mad adventures, fundraising adventures in India, and I did 30 marathons in 30 days, and I cycled the length of India. Very interestingly and very sadly, after both of those significant efforts, I fell into a deep depression. And initially, I wondered whether actually it was the sort of psychology, if you like, behind, working towards a big project, training for that project, undertaking that project, it becoming a really big part of my life, and then it ending. I thought that was the reason, but actually, increasingly, I'm wondering whether actually the stresses that my body went through and the inflammation that was likely to have occurred during that time may well have been a more important change. So that would so certainly, what is it that the other 50% need? What is it about this link with inflammation? Are two really important areas that I think it would be great we can do more in that area.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. And it's always interesting, I think, as you start to look at where science is taking us, and then you speak to individuals about their own experience, you can start to see that we're moving to a better place, I think, of listening to the people who need help and then pushing the science in the right direction, as opposed to just science being there for the interest of research, if you like. And in reality, without research, we believe at MQ, it is just guesswork. There is too big a gap still for us to fill by investing in just more treatment. What we need is more research to work out the best treatments. I will leave you with this final slide, everyone. We have a whole set of seminars going on off the back of World Mental Health Day that you can get involved in. We've got Friday looking at the impact of COVID-19 and mental health, young people's mental health, anxiety, and another one of Chris's favorite topics, mental health in the workplace as well. So please do join us for any of those and share links to this. We will be putting this recording out for you to share on all the major social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for your honesty and for your story. We really appreciate everything you've done.